Okay, today we're starting the book of Esther, and it's a very interesting book. Like Nehemiah, we're getting into books that are more narrative. They're not so textbook oriented about laws and rules. They're not as history as this person went here and fought with this person, and this person said this or that. Again, like Nehemiah, trying to do a narrative is a little different approach. And then we got the poetry books, which are a different approach also, going into Job, which is both a narrative and poetry. So that one's real interesting. But today we're looking at starting with the Esther, and we went through the timeline of how, um, of from Adam, of course, through Moses, and Moses through Joshua. Then looking at the judges, and then looking at the kings, and we looked at the history all the way up through Nehemiah. But we also had we looked at all the kings twice through Kings and Chronicles that went up to the Babylonian captivity. And so we kind of got a pretty good idea of up to that point. How things go from that point on, trying to line all that out. I made a little graph to give us an idea of what happens next. I'm going to hold it up here for a while. And so you can get a look at that, screenshot it or whatever, because we'll be talking about that. The idea that you see these things coming into play. I wrote I just picked a number, 606 BC to 406 BC, and what happened there. You'll see down here where each one of the prophets existed. You had Jeremiah, and that's kind of almost on the timeline too. Ezekiel and Daniel, they were all, kind of contemporaries in a way. Then you had Haggai through Zechariah right here. That was in this time frame, right here. Then you had, of course, Malachi. It's interesting that Nehemiah is over here. We always think that Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. It is if you line them up the way they lined them up. But if you line them up, they're not lined up chronologically. They're lined up by history and then lined up by major and minor prophets. But the minor prophets, the first three or four, Joel, Hosea, Jonah, are all pre-captivity. And then you have the post-captivity, Haggai through Zechariah, and of course Malachi. Malachi was interesting because it was written around the same time, or right just before Esther became queen. So all this stuff about you're robbing from me, how are we robbing from you, you're not doing this right, was during that setting up time. If you'll notice, between, you look at the kings here, you have Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, which is Ahasuerus, which is Queen Esther's. You see where she fits in there. You have the temple is 536 BC, and then you go backwards. You're going smaller in time at 480 BC. You have Esther, and of course here comes Ezra, and then here comes Nehemiah. And you see the reigns down here, Cyrus and Darius. Cyrus is the one who said that they could go and do it with Zerubbabel and Yeshua right here. And then you had the conflict with Darius. Darius also was a part of that. And then here you have Nehemiah. And I even go back and look that Cyrus and Darius had back the play of the Jews being there. You remember that at the time of Artaxerxes, when Nehemiah had to deal with his problems with Sanballat and Tobias. So you see how everything fits in. But here we have in the middle Ahasuerus, which is Xerxes, his wife, Esther the queen. And so that's how everything fits together. And again, Malachi is written here. So again, and Nehemiah ends with, God remember me for good. And I think that's interesting that instead of the Old Testament ending with, you're robbing me, you're a bunch of robbers, can't you trust me, can't you fulfill your obligations? Not just tithes, by the way. Tithes were just one of many things that they were doing wrong. Taking it to the Sabbath off. And here we've learned where Nehemiah was upset that they started opening the doors and trading on the Sabbath. And this was a big problem. But we see Esther here in the middle. So that's a timeline, gives us a feel for how all this fits together. And Mordecai is in the story too. So with that, Esther begins with King Ahasuerus, who's come into office. He's over 127 provinces, so he's kind of the main leader of all those provinces, and that's a lot of people to keep in play. What he does is he has nobles and princes under him that are responsible for different areas. And they tell him if there's a problem, they tell him for monetary needs, they talk to him about economy, they talk to him about all the things for running those provinces. And different ethnic groups have been put in different provinces. Unlike the Assyrians who broke people up because they didn't want them creating sedition, he let the group stay together. And it seems like all these people also from Cyrus forward were very pro Judah. They were pro the God of Judah, and they must have gotten this also from the Babylonians. If you think about when we get into Daniel, what Nebuchadnezzar experienced with the God of Judah. So we have this. They have a very big respect for them, even Cyrus. And you remember that do this for the good of the king and the king's son. They're spending all this money and sending all this down so that the Levitical priest can pray for the king and the king's son. So we see that they realize that this is a powerful God that needs to be appeased. Now, do they think it's the only God? Maybe not. Is it not their personal God, like my God? No. But do they want that powerful God appeased? You get that kind of that feel. They might have been believers also. I don't think, there's no way, no left or right. I do know that they were pro-Judah. We get an idea also through all 10 chapters that Ahasuerus was a good king. I mean, he didn't do anything wrong except for trusting Haman. But he trusted his men to tell him, okay, I need more money for this and I need more troops for that. We've got a sedition growing over here. And he's like, well, here. He would give them a ring. And they could take a little wax and they could write something on a piece of paper, and put wax on it and put the ring on it. And then it was as if the king had done it. The king had said it. They get to write what they want to fulfill these needs of the king. This is something that we see when we're given the name of Jesus. We're given this ring. And we're supposed to be writing things on a paper that Jesus would want us to write. But sometimes we write what we want and hoping God will cash it. And those checks bounce back. And it is not honorable for us to do this. To know what, if you were in a business and you were purchasing, to know what they want you to purchase, and then you go out and purchase it with your signature as if it was theirs. We see this happening in corporations all the time. That's exactly what was happening here. Unfortunately, when we get into the story, we'll find Haman was fraudulent in his claims. These people were not seditious. They were not doing what he said they were doing, and he didn't even give them a name. And that's something where Haman should have said, Ahasuerus should have said, who are these people? Who are you doing this for? But he was so busy, and okay, that's his fault on here. He does go to great lengths to fix it after all this done. And spoilers, that's giving this away. He fixes the problem, but he can't undo the edict, so he allows another edict to be written. He's in the game. He comes back into the game as a very strong man, and he's in the game right now. We'll see that he does good things. I was thinking about it earlier. Ahasuerus and Boaz, they were people who had the power to do what they wanted, but they didn't have the authority of God to do it. And when I say that, Boaz could have been a guy who ran his household with a stern fist. He could have been someone who lined the girls up to run through his bedroom. He could have been vicious and mean and really a slave driver. He had the power, but he didn't have the authority. When he went to the authority source, the authority told him, you will do it this way. Same thing with Ahasuerus. He seems like he's a good man. He's got the power and authority, but he limits himself. We'll see to where when we learn about Vashti in a minute, he could have killed her. He was a king, even though she was a queen. She didn't have power of her own. She didn't have anything of her own. The house was his. The clothes were his. The servants were all his. She was living in his world 100%. And when she turns and doesn't want to obey, doesn't want to come to him when he calls, because he is the king, showing that reverence and honor, he could have killed her and he didn't. So we'll get into the story, and I'll show actually when we're doing this, we'll see that he's actually a pretty good guy. Ahasuerus is the king over India to Ethiopia, which is a large piece of land. And there are 127 provinces. And he lived in Shushan, and he had his palace there. In the 3rd year of his reign, he sets up a big banquet for the nobles to come down. I mean, it's a big blowout. It's set up in his house. He would have a house for himself, like a compound, but he also had a house, a little compound, for his wife. Now, his wife, the queen, this was not hers. This was his. He provided everything, the food, the maids, the servants, the chamberlains. Everything was over there, even the clothes on her back, the jewelry she wore, everything was his. Now, she didn't belong to him. I mean, had she been his, he could have forced her. He could have drug her over there. He could have killed her, whatever. He didn't treat her like property. but she didn't show him the respect for what he was providing for her. You know, so he was worthy of the honor for what he did for her. And so we see that there was this great banquet, and the men were over here, the women were over here, and they go through this banquet. They talk about how, they drank in gold and how wonderful the palace was and how it was set up. It's very lavish. All these people were there. Nobody was compelled. This didn't get the idea this was some Canaanite bacchanal where everybody's having, sex with everybody or whatever. Just a party, a banquet. No one was compelled to do anything. You could be a part. You almost get the idea that sometimes in these Canaanite parties, they compelled you. They forced you to participate, whether you wanted to or not. You will get in, and here's what we're doing today. We kind of see this sometimes in these more underground stories of what goes on in some of the areas, some of the stuff that talks about people that, do things and they compel others to go down and do it with them. More satanic and oriented ideas. But here we have, it's just, it said there was nobody was compelled. And Vashti the queen had a feast for the women in her house that belonged to King Ahasuerus. Once again, this was Ahasuerus' house. And they, on the seventh day, when their hearts were merry, he wants to bring Vashti in to show Vashti and show off how beautiful she is. He's not there asking her to be a slave girl or anything like that. He just calls her to come to show them how beautiful she is. And she says no. She doesn't want to. She refuses to come at the king's commandment. And the king is the king. He commands forces. He commands troops. And he's commanding you to come. And you say no. This turns into a big problem in the provinces. Because the queen sets the tone for the women. The king sets the tone for the government. The queen will set the tone. And so that's going to be a problem. The provinces and the men that are all there seeing this see this as a problem. They say, what shall we do unto Queen Vashti according to the law? Because she has not performed the commandment of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. Now, it was a law to come to the king when he called. And this was for all the people, not just for Vashti. If the king called, you were supposed to come to him. So it wasn't just, we get that this just wasn't a husband-wife thing, but also he's the king. He told you to come, and it was against the law not to come when the king compelled you to. And so what shall we do? For this deed, the women shall hear abroad, and they shall despise their husbands in their eyes. And it was reported that Vashti, the queen, was commanded by the king and came not. Likewise, the ladies of Persia and Media will say that unto all the priests, the deeds of the queen, thus they shall arise too much contempt and wrath. So the women will rise up against these men and be contemptuous. And men can't lead in their household if they have contemptuous women. We see this mentioned in Proverbs. It talks about the contemptuous woman, the woman who doesn't want to go with you, the woman that doesn't want to follow you, the woman that doesn't want to obey you. That's contempt. She has contempt for you in her eyes. Men that aren't leading are contemptuous in women's eyes. We need to always be leaders. They have contempt for us when we aren't leading. And so it pleased the king, and he gave a royal decree that he put away Vashti, and she was gone. She was stripped of all of that stuff. She lost. See, he didn't kill her. Like I pointed out, he could have been a man who killed her, and he didn't. He had the power to. Remember, power over, power to. The whole world thinks that, we get this idea that men are just wanting to power over, power over. I want to be your king and you will be my slave. No, we want to give power to. Real men want to give power to their wives, power to their families, power to their communities, power to their churches. We're not the evil people that some of these people in the feminists and some of the other left wings and liberals would say men are. Toxic masculinity. That's not true, but we have power we want to share, but we only share it with people who would submit to us. You're not going to give your power to somebody who wants to submit. You'll just be growing more contempt. And so this creates a problem. And so it's decreed that wives shall give to their husbands honor both to the great and to the small. And the saying pleased the king. And letters were written to all the king's provinces, and every province according to the land. Every man should bear rule in his own household, and that it should be published according to the language of every people. The idea of men ruling the household. But remember, I'm going to state something real quick. When Adam gave When God gave Adam dominion over the planet and all the animals and the insects and everything, and to have dominion over everything, the woman was not in the game yet. She was still in his side. When she came along, she was supposed to join him in dominion over this planet, but he was responsible. When the fall came, God came calling for Adam. It's a big difference between responsibility and right. You might say, I have the right to something, but are you taking responsibility for that right? And so, like I've said before, power and authority is what I'm seeing here. He had the power. He could have been a sinner. He could have been an evil king and just went in and I was just going to wipe out and I'm just going to clear it all out. We even see in chapter 2 when we get to it that his establishment for having a new queen, a second queen, is a lot more thoughtful. You get the idea that maybe he rushed into this with Vashti. Now he takes about a year. He's going to invite all the beautiful women in that want to come because you want a queen who's willing, and take them through a year of purification, and I think that means also education. How would you be a queen? How would you take care of a banquet? How would you take care of visiting dignitaries? How would you take care of ambassadors? How would you deal with other women of other statures? How do you deal with having maids and chamberlains and servants under you to fulfill the needs of the king? And how do you keep the house for the king? Her house, which was his house, was to be a house of respite for him. If he stays at his house for 3 to 4 or 5 days and all he's doing is king stuff and ruling and making sure the economy and the military and all this stuff is taken care of, and he needs that break, he goes to her house, and she's supposed to be a place of charm and beauty, of softness, of understanding, of love, of food. And it's not just for her, and just as for him, these are also things that she can participate in the beauty and wonder of that. They're enjoying the meals together. They're enjoying the wine together. They're enjoying the song, and maybe they have little actors playing together, and they're, of course, enjoying the lovemaking together. It was meant to be a togetherness over here that strengthens him to go back and do his work. So we don't see this. We kind of have this more medieval, Lancelot, Guinevere, Arthur kind of approach to what a king is. And then we look at some of the bad kings and kind of superimpose that on anybody who's a king. But we don't see that with Ahasuerus. And so it's going to get in chapter 2 where he sets up this competition. He's going to spend the year also in making them beautiful. There's so many things in here that women can learn. Their diet was a certain way, and that kept them trim and beautiful looking. They had oil baths, and you think of a spa to really get their skin glowing and looking beautiful. They were educated, they were poised, and they get to pick the type of woman they were going to present to the king. Some of them would adorn themselves very heavily with jewels and bring out some of their personality. I'm giving a little bit of this way, but Esther goes in pretty quiet, pretty humble. And it says that I'm going to give away here. When the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her from her daughter, had come in unto the king, she required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed, and Esther obtained favor. She didn't dress herself up and doll herself up. She kept herself very simple and basic and beautiful. And so we see here, there's a lot here that can be gleaned from this, both for beauty is important. Sometimes that's what's taken out of men's life. I don't think women understand how beautiful in our eyes you really are. And I don't think you understand that the curves and the curves of your waist and the curves of your eyes and the curves of your hair and your cheek, and we know that your skin is soft and your voice is soft and your eyes are bright, and when you're looking at us a certain way, we just want to give you half our kingdom. He says that several times here at the end. He's so pleased with her. You almost get the idea that he's more pleased with her, that she's actually giving him more than he's giving her. And that's really a powerful thing when you're thinking about power. Power isn't just this raw energy that goes from one place to another, but there's this soft energy that waves back that makes men want to do instead of have to do. That's the key here, the difference between femininity and feminism. One of them is making you, forcing you to do something. The other one is encouraging you through softness and gentleness and through love to do it. And men will do more from femininity than feminism. The nagging and complaining and I'm not happy. All of that's feminism. That you've given me a wonderful life and you're a wonderful man and let's move forward. That's feminism. So we see this building here. He's building this woman and trying to find a woman who fits that motif of beauty, strength, compassion, love, loyalty, all of these things that he's building. The the purification is to see if those traits will come out of this woman. And of course they come out of Esther in spades. So we'll continue with this, but we've set the groundwork. We're going to move on through this wonderful story and see how God moves and uses this slip of a girl, probably 120 pounds. She could have been anywhere from 16 to 25, to save a nation. It's really, really good. They even have a celebration called Purim, which the Jews even celebrate today in honor of what Esther did. It's a beautiful story, and we're going to move on. Thank you.